Robert I Baratheon could have been the 18th monarch of the Targaryen dynasty, but he became the first monarch of the Baratheon royal dynasty instead. And this is the 19th and probably final this time video in my Targaryen Kings series. I've done them all, and even doing Bob feels like a stretch, but he was part of the gang. At least a little. Robert was born in 262 AC, the final year of King Jaehaerys II's reign. His son and heir Aerys took the throne at age 18, making Robert and the Mad King a lot closer in age than a lot of people assume. Aerys was only 39 years old when he was kingslayed, despite looking considerably older thanks to his hygiene issues, years of paranoia and agoraphobia, and being portrayed in Game of Thrones by an actor in his 60s. Robert was the firstborn of 3 children to Steffon Baratheon and Cassandra Estermont. His brothers need no introduction. Estermont is this little island just off the coast of the Rainwood. Their sigil is a turtle because George R. R. Martin loves turtles. He famously wears the hell out of this turtle hat, and he kept pet turtles as a child in New Jersey. And the OG official portraitist of A Song of Ice and Fire, Amok, did a germ, and he gave George a turtle-shaped pommel for his sword. The seat of House Estermont is Greenstone, and it was at this castle where Cersei and Jaime's procreation resulted in Joffrey, while Robert was fornicating his widow cousin in another room. There's a Leon Estermont, presumably a younger son of Lord Estermont, in House of the Dragon who becomes one of Aegon II's Kingsguard. He's killed during a riot and doesn't exist in the books. Sir Gunther Estermont participated in the tourney at Ashford Meadow, but I couldn't spot him or an Estermont banner anywhere in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Oh well. Robert's Estermont ancestry is a lot less important than his Targaryen ancestry. His grandmother was Princess Raelle, the last-born child of King Aegon V and Queen Betha Blackwood. She was a political tool that Aeg used to fix his problems with Lionel Baratheon, the Laughing Storm. Aeg's heir, Duncan the Small, was supposed to marry Lionel's daughter, thus making her the eventual queen of Westeros if things went to plan. They didn't because Duncan fell in love with Jenny of Oldstones, which upset Lionel so much he fought Duncan the Tall in a trial by combat in open rebellion against the Iron Throne. Duncan won, and instead of destroying House Baratheon root and stem the way some lords deal with their problems, Aeg sealed their peace with another betrothal. Raelle would marry Lionel's heir, Ormond. Raelle was a kid at the time, so she spent a few years in Storm's End as a cupbearer and lady-in-waiting to Lady Baratheon. It's a little messed up that Raelle had to pay for her older brother's refusal to be arrangedly married by being arrangedly married herself. But that would have happened anyways because political alliances are all daughters are good for in Westeros, even to a nice guy like Aeg. If the show gets this far, perhaps we'll see everything I just said adapted in future seasons of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. But regardless, that's how Robert, Stannis, and Renly are part Targaryen. Raelle was their grandmother, and since she was married off so young, she was probably very present in their childhoods. We have no idea when she died. Maybe in 259 AC at the tragedy of Summerhall, in which case Robert would have never even met her. But it's possible Raelle lived until very recently. At her oldest, she'd only be in her 70s-ish if she were alive right now in the year of our lore 300 AC. But I sincerely doubt Grandma Raelle is hanging out in Storm's End somewhere after her own grandson erased her family's existence from Westeros. There is a sort of cruel irony, I guess, that when Robert killed Rhaegar and deposed the Mad King, and his allies killed Rhaegar's children, those were all his relatives. The Mad King was Robert's first cousin once removed. War. What's it good for, if not a legal excuse to kill your cousin nobody likes? This video is brought to you by my Patreon. For $5 per month, you can watch all my new videos days and sometimes weeks before anyone else. You get exclusive stuff like Crusader Kings gameplay, and you can support me directly. Thank you. When Robert and Stannis were kids, their father took them to see the court of King's Landing. Steffon was close friends with both King Aerys and Tywin Lannister, the 3 men having spent parts of their youth together as squires in King's Landing and then participating in the War of the Ninepenny Kings. Robert held Stannis' hand as they watched the king hold court, only they later realized it was Tywin sitting the throne who had so impressed them. Aerys had cut himself earlier, so his hand took his place. From a young age then, Robert respected Tywin Lannister, and didn't begrudge him years later for not supporting his rebellion sooner, and made Cersei a queen the way Aerys had refused to, and pardoned Jaime of his kingslaying. The majority of Robert's youth he spent being fostered in the Vale by Jon Arryn, along with Ned Stark. Jon Arryn was childless, and remained so until Sweet Robin came along in his old age. As Ned was his father's second of 3 sons, it makes some sense that he was fostered elsewhere. But Robert was his father's heir, so it's a little strange that Steffon would send him to the Eyrie. I think George needed 3 things to be true. Robert and Ned needed to be friends since childhood. Robert needed to be older than his brothers, so he'd become king instead of them. And Robert needed a close relationship to Jon Arryn before he dies at the start of the series. The easiest explanation, then, is that Jon Arryn fostered the 2 boys in the Eyrie. Other than because he wanted to, George might have put Robert in the Vale in connection to Rickard Stark's southern ambitions, which Barbary Dustin mentions, this idea that Lords Stark, Baratheon, Tully, and Arryn were forming a political bloc against the Iron Throne. That's beyond the scope of this video, but the Southern Ambitions theory has been discussed for years on the internet if you want to learn more. Robert's childhood isn't all that detailed, but we do know he participated in a tourney at Storm's End, where he was unhorsed by Barristan Selmy. It's called Lord Steffon's tourney, meaning it had to take place before Steffon died in either 278 or 279, meaning Robert was probably in his early-ish teens at the time. Barristan would have been 40-ish at the height of his powers, so it makes sense he defeated young Bobby. And it helps color Robert's non-insane, reasonable personality. Despite losing to Barry in a tourney, despite Barry opposing him during the war, he still keeps him in his Kingsguard because that's a man Robert respects. Somebody more vain, like an Aerys or Viserys, might have executed Barristan the first opportunity they found, had they been in Robert's massive shoes. But Bob was not a salty fellow. He had other character defects, which I'll discuss later on. It seems that once he became an adult, Robert split his time between the Eyrie and Storm's End quite a bit, especially once his parents died. King Aerys sent Steffon Baratheon to Volantis in search of a bride for Rhaegar. Volantis maintains a strong population of pure Valyrian nobility, the folks who live behind the 200-foot-high black walls foremost amongst them. In this oldest part of the city dwell Volantines who can prove an unbroken ancestral link to the old blood of Valyria. Steffon didn't find a suitable bride for Rhaegar, but he did come back with a fool named Patchface. It's like sending your kid to the grocery store for milk and bread, but he comes back with one of those 5-pound gummy bears. It's a little hard to believe Steffon couldn't find a young lady in Volantis for Rhaegar. You'd think these horrible, rich, blood purists would jump at the opportunity to marry one of their daughters into the most powerful Valyrian family in the world. On the other hand, the Targaryens, for all their incest, were perhaps not inbred enough for the folks of Volantis. Unlike the old blood behind the black walls, Rhaegar cannot trace an unbroken link of Valyrian ancestry back to the Freehold. His great-grandmother was a Blackwood, his great-great-grandmother was a Dane, and his great-great-great-grandmother was a Martell of Dorne. The Targaryens had lost their dragons and had lost their pure Valyrian bloodline, and thus the old blood of Volantis had no interest. This is my own speculation, to be clear. Maybe Steffon just didn't try very hard because he wanted Rhaegar to marry Lysa or Catelyn as part of the Southern Ambitions theory. Or he just didn't like Aerys anymore and wanted to do a bad job. Or maybe there really were 0 Volantine girls around Rhaegar's age available for marrying. It's really not that important, and I'm getting lost in the weeds here. A likely place for me to be. It was on his return from this trip that Steffon and Cassandra died, and Robert watched it happen. The Lord's 2-masted galley, Windproud, broke up within sight of his castle. From its parapets, his 2 eldest sons had watched as their father's ship was smashed against the rocks and swallowed by the waters. 100 oarsmen and sailors went down with Lord Steffon Baratheon and his lady wife, and for days thereafter, every tide left a fresh crop of swollen corpses on the strand below Storm's End. So Robert was Lord of Storm's End now, at 16 years old. Up in the Vale, he worked through his grief over seeing both his parents die by impregnating a woman of the proletariat and fathering his first bastard, Maya Stone. He visited baby Maya all the time, sometimes with Ned, but never officially acknowledged her as his daughter. Perhaps he would have if Maya came to live with him in the Red Keep after he became king, but Cersei basically threatened to murder the child if Robert did that. He domestically abused Cersei for the threat, giving her bruises she hid from Jaime, and Maya remained in the Vale. So Maya is now a 20-year-old mountain woman, guiding folks up to the Eyrie on mules and stuff. She's awesome, and I love her. Anyways, Lyanna Stark knew about baby Maya and refused to marry Robert, believing he would never keep to one bed. Ned defended Bob, but Lyanna said, "Love is sweet, dearest Ned, but it cannot change a man's nature." And reflecting back, Ned agrees that Robert only loved Lyanna for her beauty, but never knew the iron underneath. They were officially betrothed with Lord Rickard Stark's blessing, but I doubt the marriage would have gone through even if Rhaegar never happened. At the tourney of Harrenhal, Rhaegar tipped his lance toward Lyanna and placed a crown of blue winter roses on her lap, thus making her the queen of love and beauty. Robert may have laughed and said that Rhaegar was only paying Lyanna her due, but he also brooded on the insult and began to hate Rhaegar forever. After all, Lyanna was about to become Robert's property. He essentially had her on pre-order, and Rhaegar was trying to steal her. Grr. Angry Stormlord grab hammer. Gee, do you think George was doing some Thor posting when he made Robert? Lord of Storm's End, God of Thunder, both have mighty warhammers, Robert gets fat and jolly with a big beard. Yeah, they call me the Noticer. The tourney at Harrenhal took place early-ish in 281 AC, and Rhaegar ran off with Lyanna in early 282. Lots of people think the two events are a lot closer than they actually are. Instead of naming Lyanna the Queen of Love and Beauty, and then running off with her in the rebellion beginning, Rhaegar went back to Dragonstone, lived with Elia throughout her pregnancy with Aegon, believed his son would be the prince that was promised, and there must be one more, was told Elia couldn't have any more children, and then he went back to the mainland and kidnapped Lyanna. The World of Ice and Fire tells us, with the coming of the new year, the Crown Prince had taken to the road with half a dozen of his closest friends and confidants, on a journey that would ultimately lead him back to the Riverlands. Not 10 leagues from Harrenhal, Rhaegar fell upon Lyanna Stark of Winterfell and carried her off, lighting a fire that would consume his house and kin and all those he loved, and half the realm besides. The kidnapping, if it really was a kidnapping, occurred just before Brandon Stark's wedding to Catelyn Tully. Brandon was in the Riverlands when he heard the news, and he rode straight to King's Landing and demanded that Rhaegar come confront him. Obviously, Rhaegar wasn't there. What was Robert doing in the roughly 9 to 12 months after the tourney at Harrenhal and before the kidnapping? I don't know, chilling with Ned and Maya in the Vale, I guess. At least, that's where they were when King Aerys sent word to Lord Arryn that he should execute both Ned and Robert, an extremely ambitious request that Jon Arryn obviously refused. It makes sense that Aerys would want Ned dead after killing both his brother and his father, but what did Robert do?
I'm like, what'd he say fuck me for?
Perhaps in a rare moment of lucidity, Aerys correctly surmised that since Rhaegar ran off with Robert's betrothed, it was best to murder Robert now instead of letting that situation unfold. Anywho, Jon Arryn called his banners to war, Ned did some ninja shit to get back to Winterfell and call his banners, and Robert led the assault on Gulltown because House Grafton remained loyal to the crown. Robert was first over the walls, slew Lord Mark Grafton himself, and then took a boat to Storm's End and called his banners to war. Before leaving the Stormlands, Robert got word from an informer that some lords were staying loyal to the crown. As Areo Hota would say, somebody always tells. So Robert made his stand at the ruins of Summerhall, the castle where his enemy Rhaegar was born and loved visiting all his life, so it was a fitting place for the first battles of the rebellion. Robert smashed Lords Grandison, Catherine, and Fell in 3 separate battles in one day. He left Stannis in charge of Storm's End and moved on to Ashford in the Reach, the historical site of Aerion Brightflame's ass-whooping at the hands of Sir Duncan the Tall. It was the 3rd battle of the rebellion and Robert's first and only loss. Lord Randall Tarly led the Tyrell vanguard and overwhelmed Robert's forces, forcing him to run away before the rest of the Tyrell army arrived. He took his forces north to the Riverlands so he could link up with the Starks, Arryns, and Tullys. The loss at Ashford didn't really harm Robert's chances of winning, but it did allow the Tyrells easy access to lay siege on Storm's End, a siege that lasted for the remainder of the war and nearly killed his brothers Stannis and Renly. Robert must have gotten stabbed at Ashford, because we're told in an Arya chapter that he was being treated for a wound at the Stony Sept when the Loyalist army, led by John Connington, fell upon the town. Connington went door to door like a Girl Scout, asking if anyone had seen or was currently sheltering a belligerent to the crown, until Ned Stark and Hoster Tully arrived and routed him. Robert stopped hiding once he had backup, killed 6 men personally, and won the battle. Pretty awesome strategic victory for Robert, as now all the rebel forces could congregate in the Riverlands. But the sound of the bells the Sept rung as the battle begun gave John Connington PTSD, and it's a relatively popular theory that Dany's ending from Game of Thrones, in which the sound of King's Landing's bells triggered some sort of lunatic microchip in her brain, might be stolen from George Martin's ending for John Connington. So if John Con hears some bells in King's Landing while trying to put Aegon on the throne, and decides to blow up some wildfire or whatever, I guess we have those bells at Stony Sept to thank. By the way, Robert spent his recuperation from his battle wound at the Peach, an inn at the Stony Sept, and managed to love-make not 1, not 2, but all of the inn's sex workers before the Battle of the Bells began. One of these women got pregnant, and a bastard girl named Bella was born 9 months later. Arya meets Bella in Book 3, and doesn't believe she's really Robert Baratheon's bastard, since a lot of people have black hair, people like Gendry. Yeah, George was real subtle with that one. Bella offers to ring Gendry's bell, unaware that she's speaking to her half-brother. George loves incest. It was at this point, months into Robert's rebellion, after battles at Gulltown, Summerhall, Ashford, and Stony Sept, that Prince Rhaegar finally returned from the Tower of Joy and made his father ask Tywin Lannister for help. Aerys was too proud to ask Tywin after having spent years beefing with him, but in the end it didn't even matter because Tywin ignored their call for help. So Rhaegar was forced to lead a severely weakened army. We know they had at least 40,000 men, but no more than 4,000 of those were mounted knights. The rest were all archers, free riders, and peasants plucked from the fields to stand there with a hoe and die. Imagine that. One moment you're tending your sourleaf garden, and the next you've got the demon of the Trident riding at you with a 50-pound warhammer in his hand. Most of the Battle of the Trident occurred at the Ruby Ford, although at that point it was just the ford. Lyn Corbray, wielding Lady Forlorn, broke the Dornish host, and Robert met Rhaegar face to face in the stream. Thanks to Donald Noye's expert handiwork, Robert's hammer caved in Rhaegar's chest and sent rubies flying all over the river. The remaining loyalist troops retreated to King's Landing, and Robert spared Barristan Selmy's life even though Roose Bolton suggested killing him. One less body for him to steal and do vampire stuff with. Robert said, "I will not kill a man for loyalty, nor for fighting well. But I will kill a 13-year-old girl across the world in case her new Dothraki ephebophile husband decides to cross the narrow sea and conquer me one day." Robert had another wound, so Ned raised his vanguard down to King's Landing, trying to beat Tywin Lannister there. But obviously, Tywin got there first, did the sack of King's Landing, killed Elia and the kids, and Ned found Jaime sitting on the Iron Throne. Don't worry though, he was only keeping it warm for Robert.
The term folly.
Ned believed that Robert's hatred for House Targaryen was a madness in him. After being presented with Rhaenys and Aegon's corpses, he said, "I see no babes, only dragon spawn." It's weird he hates all of House Targaryen's existence instead of just the Mad King for being mad and Rhaegar for stealing Lyanna, because Robert was himself a Targaryen. I really wish George had given us just a line or two about Robert's feelings about his own Targaryen blood. After all, it was the justification for him taking the throne, but he simultaneously hates the very bloodline that made him king. Of course, Renly says Robert's warhammer won him the throne, not his Targaryen blood, but Renly's biased against using legal inheritance as a means of succession rather than whoever's stronger. Robert's warhammer won the war, and his blood won him the throne. As a close relation of House Targaryen, Robert could have simply taken the Targaryen name and ruled as the 18th monarch in the Targaryen dynasty. His grandmother was Princess Royale, and House Baratheon was founded, probably, by a son of Aerion Targaryen. But Westeros was sick of Targaryens, so the royal house became Baratheon. Upon his ascension, Robert gave Storm's End to Renly and Dragonstone to Stannis. We all know how bitter this made Stan, but George says that Robert didn't mean it as a slight. He was simply affirming Stannis as heir to the Iron Throne, who traditionally holds his seat at Dragonstone. Robert could have reserved both castles for his future sons, but George calls this another instance of Robert's great but careless generosity. There was some concern early in Robert's reign that sooner or later Viserys would try to reclaim his throne. That's the main reason he married Cersei, since Jon Arryn convinced him to lock in Tywin Lannister's support should a war for Viserys' claim ever be fought. Oberyn Martell began planning that war himself, until Jon Arryn visited Dorne, spoke with Doran Martell, and calmed everyone down. He was doing his job as Hand of the King, and on paper, the match with Cersei was perfect, as Viserys did end up trying to fight for the throne. Jon Arryn couldn't have known that Cersei would cuckold Robert and arrange his death years later in the Kingswood, but I do wonder who Robert might have married instead of Cersei. Neither Tully's sister was an option, having married Jon Arryn and Ned Stark respectively. There was Ashara Dayne. A match with Dorne could help seal that wound, but she might have committed suicide before Robert could propose marriage. Why not her younger sister then, Illyria Dayne? We don't have her exact age, but we know she's Edric Dayne's aunt and betrothed to Beric Dondarrion. Beric's 15 years younger than Robert, so Illyria's probably his age or even younger, just a small child at Robert's ascension. So a betrothal to Illyria would have allowed Robert to remain depressed over Lyanna the way he wanted, and not have to marry for at least a decade. He had 2 brothers for heirs in case he should die in the meantime, plus Stannis had married Selyse Florent to make even more heirs. But Jon Arryn wanted Robert to have an heir of his own sooner rather than later. One of the Hightower girls might have made sense, Denise, Layla, Alysanne, or Lynesse, plenty to choose from, although if you're Robert, you probably don't want to reward the Reach for supporting Aerys by marrying one of their daughters. You'll want to marry a daughter from a house that supported you. Barbie Dustin was recently widowed and available to wed, but losing her husband in the rebellion and never getting the chance to marry her beloved Brandon Stark had made her hate Eddard, and she'd likely refuse to marry his best friend even if he was the king. House Royce then? Bronze Yohn had several daughters who might have been eligible brides for Robert. Anya Waynwood had several daughters as well, but there just wasn't a match for Robert nearly as prestigious as Cersei Lannister. Unfortunately. For both of them. Robert married Cersei in 284 AC, the year after the rebellion, and she was basically glad to do it. Although she boned Jaime right before the wedding, Robert was handsome and strong, and she liked the attention she got as queen, but their first night together, Robert called her Lyanna, and that was the only time their sex was consensual. Early on she confronted him. "You hurt me," she complained. He had the grace to look ashamed. "It was not me, my lady," he said in a sulky, sullen tone, like a child caught stealing apple cakes from the kitchen. "It was the wine. I drink too much wine." To wash down his admission, he reached for his horn of ale. So Robert Baratheon was a marital rapist and an alcoholic. He did remember what he did to her at night. She was convinced of that. She could see it in his eyes. He only pretended to forget. It was easier to do that than to face his shame. Deep down, Robert Baratheon was a coward. Manly enough to beat people to death in battle with a giant hammer, but too cowardly to face his own shame and stop raping his wife. He was a simple-minded brute and not much else. Luckily for Cersei, Robert began slaking his lust on other women, most of the time. If Maggie the Frog's prophecy is to be believed, Robert had 16 children in total, which is honestly not even that high considering he was spreading his seed around Westeros for 15 years as king. Varys the Spider only knows about 8 bastards, but even he can't know everything. Even Aegon the Unworthy, the most famous bastard haver of all, wasn't putting up Robert Baratheon numbers. Aegon had 15 children, although his 3 kids with Belair O'Ferris are disputed, and it's also likely that he's responsible for Viserys Plum, Jane Lothston, and some of Lord Butterwell's grandchildren. Let's call it a wash, I guess. At least Robert refrained from legitimizing all his bastards on his deathbed. Otherwise, we might be reading about the First Gendry Rebellion right now. In 289 AC, Balon Greyjoy tried to secede from the Union. His father Quellon actually joined Robert's rebellion on Team Bob, and attacked the Reach, but the Shield Islands fought back and Quellon died. Now, 6 years later, Balon had built up the Iron Fleet, declared himself king of the Iron Isles, and burned the Lannister fleet at Lannisport in a sneak attack. He then attacked Seaguard and got his butt handed back to him by Jason Mallister, along with his heir Roderick's death. Stannis Baratheon then goofed on Victarion Greyjoy in the Strait of Hormuz, or the Strait of Fair Isle rather, Robert, Ned, and Tywin were then able to land troops on Pike as Stannis took Great Wick and Barristan Selmy took Old Wick. Brought before King Robert in chains, Balon Greyjoy said, "You may take my head, but you cannot name me traitor. No Greyjoy ever swore an oath to a Baratheon." So Robert just laughed and said, "Swear one now, or lose that stubborn head of yours." This decision would end up biting Robert's namesake in the butt 20 years later, when Balon rose up again versus Robb Stark. Cersei thinks so too. Robert should have scoured the Isles after Balon Greyjoy rose up against him, Cersei thought. He smashed their fleet, burned their towns, and broke their castles, but when he had them on their knees, he let them up again. He should have made another island of their skulls. That was what her father would have done, but Robert never had the stomach that a king requires if he hopes to keep the peace in the realm. It's interesting how Robert was able to be so lenient and cool and magnanimous during wartime, but was a horrible drunken abuser in peacetime. Tywin was consistent. He sucked 100% of the time. Donald Noy said that Robert was never the same after donning his crown. Once the fighting was done, he turned to rust. He had zero interest in the day-to-day governance of Westeros, leaving those matters to hand to the king Jon Arryn, master of ship Stannis, and the rest of his small council. Robert says, "Laws are a tedious business, and counting coppers is worse. And the people, there is no end of them. I sit on that damnable iron chair and listen to them complain until my mind is numb and my ass is raw. They all want something, money or land or justice, the lies they tell. And my lords and ladies are no better. I am surrounded by flatterers and fools. It can drive a man to madness, Ned." Over the years, Robert saddled Westeros with over 6 million gold pieces of debt, thanks to all the tourneys and feasts he hosted. The royal treasury was flowing with gold when Robert took the throne, according to Ned. For all his insanity, the Mad King was far more fiscally responsible than Robert Baratheon. I suppose it's easy to save money when you're afraid to go outside and you think everyone's trying to poison you. It took Robert 15 years to bankrupt the crown and piss away all the Targaryen money. Now they owed money to the Lannisters, the Tyrells, the Iron Bank, some Tyroshi folks, and even the corrupt High Septon. It's rather pathetic that some kings, like Jaehaerys I, used their gold for massive public works projects like road systems without managing to bankrupt the realm, and Robert seems to have accomplished nothing for anyone other than himself. He hated ruling so much that he just spent all the crown's money amusing himself so that he'd forget he was the king. What would have happened if Robert lived, and there was no more money to be borrowed? Robert might have ended up losing his power anyways, being put into a conservatorship like Brittany, while Tywin did whatever horrible things Tywin would do to erase the national deficit. And that's if Robert doesn't get assassinated first by a faceless man. As they say, the Iron Bank will have its due. The last moments of Robert's reign are when shit really hit the fan. Just before the books begin, he holds a tourney in King's Landing for Joffrey's 12th birthday, and Robert wins a Valyrian steel dagger from Littlefinger there. Jon Arryn then promptly dies, and this is the dagger Joffrey steals to send an assassin after Bran Stark after Bran witnessed Cersei and Jaime copulating right beneath Robert's nose. The assassination attempt prompting Catelyn to arrest Tyrion for a crime he didn't commit with a blade belonging to King Robert, which snowballs into Jaime wounding Eddard and raising an army while Cersei arranges Robert's death in the Kingswood via hunting under the influence. There's a lot of ifs in these last weeks and months that could have avoided turmoil. If Robert had reared Joffrey better, instead of just knocking out his teeth whenever he tortured a cat, perhaps Joffrey wouldn't try murdering a Stark to impress his father. If Robert hadn't hired Littlefinger to abet his money-spending problems, the Valyrian dagger would be a non-factor. Littlefinger would then not be present in the Red Keep to seduce Lysa Arryn into poisoning Jon Arryn, prompting Robert to journey north and make Ned his new hand, and prompting Stannis to leave King's Landing in a huff for not being made Hand of the King himself. Stannis was just about to uncover the fact that Robert's heirs were illegitimate, a fact Jon Arryn was sniffing around, and a fact Ned Stark died for. Side note, I get that Varys wants to destabilize the realm so that Aegon, the perfect prince, can come clean it all up. He admits as much to a dying Kevin Lannister. What's Littlefinger's motivation for killing Jon Arryn and betraying Ned, thus keeping Cersei, Joffrey, and the status quo alive in King's Landing? Personal power, I guess. He's made Lord of Harrenhal and Lord Paramount of the Trident for his efforts, and is squirming his way into power in the Vale as well. So that's how King Robert got manipulated by his own gluttony and failure to see the worst in people into beggaring his own realm, fathering 0 true-born heirs, and letting folks like Varys and Littlefinger pull the strings of Westerosi politics rather than himself. If you want my assessment, Robert was a bad king. Not as individually cruel as Maegor or Aegon IV, but he was closer to Viserys I, which is ironic. Viserys was physically weak and unable or unwilling to see the plotmakers in his own court. Otto the scheming hand, Alicent the scheming queen, Ironrod, Criston Cole, the Green faction was an obvious problem, but Viserys never came to his senses, and his death brought war to Westeros. Robert was physically strong and capable of fighting, but his downfall was much the same as Viserys's. Unable to see Cersei's treason, Varys and Littlefinger's scheming, his own poor habits costing himself the realm. And his death ushered in the War of the Five Kings, just as Viserys's ushered in the Dance of the Dragons. Oh, and they were also both ephebophiles, like most men in George's story, I guess. Viserys married his 11-year-old cousin Emma and waited till she was 13 to climb on top of her, and the sex worker who Robert procreated to make Bara, the little baby who Alar Dîm kills on Cersei's order, was so young that Ned Stark didn't even dare to ask her age. He figured she was no older than 15, so probably 14 or even younger the first time Robert slept with her. His legacy through Westerosi eyes will always be the demon of the Trident, the warrior king who ended the dynasty of Dragonlords. But by the end of his reign, the crown was bankrupt, the court overrun with schemers, the realm boiling over with succession crises and declarations of independence. Let me know down in the comments where you'd rank Robert Baratheon among the rest of House Targaryen's kings. Thanks for watching and subscribing.